So thank you. Hopefully the meeting, Paul will join us when he can. And good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee meeting. I was going to send out a little welcome to Paul and crack some jokes at his expense, but that's all gone by the wayside now, so we'll crack straight on. We have a busy agenda for tonight's meeting, but firstly to practical matters. Please may I remind you all to mute when you and unless you're addressing an item, and raise your virtual hands. It makes the meeting so much easier to manage if you could do that. And I'll refer to Jane from governance if I need to record a vote or any other procedural matters. Thank you all very much. So moving first to apologies. Jane, have you received any apologies?
Yes, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Sue Webb. And
we briefly talked about the co-opted members, but no, they haven't sent any apologies. They're not here, so that's we can chase that later. So minutes, according to my records, it's only myself, Councillor Harvey, Councillor Nick Beggy, and Councillor Richard Coleman can actually approve the minutes. So could I have a show? Could I first of all, I'll propose the minutes, and can I have a seconder, please? Nick, Councillor Beggy, that's the one I saw first. Sorry, Councillor Coleman. And then if I could have a show of hands to actually approve the minutes. Nick, are you not approving? Sorry, and that's unanimous. Thank you. Great. Before we move on, I just want to raise a couple of points that actually came that would remain hanging over from the minutes. Firstly, with regard to the new children's plan that was supposed to be published or made available to us today, a proof has been circulated to officers and a couple of amendments are required. So hopefully it'll be back by the end of the week for sign off and subsequent distribution. So it'll be a couple of days late, but we will be able to get vision of that new children's plan, hopefully. Secondly, with regard to the partners quality assurance framework, partners who provide children's services are held to account through the Children and Young People's Partnership, where the plan is monitored. There is a QA framework for children's services, which actually was revised in 21 and is working much better. This is a follow-up item that was actually in the meeting minutes. If issues regarding quality of partners practice are identified, then these are addressed directly with the relevant partner and escalated through the safeguarding partnership procedures. I just wanted to bring those to everybody's attention because they were sort of left hanging from the actual minutes. So if everybody's happy, I'll charge on. Any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Thank you very much. Petitions, deputation request. Oh, sorry. I can see the hands now. Yes. Go ahead.
Yourself. Councillor Brown was first.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Just for the record, I am now sitting as a family magistrate on the Leicestershire and Rutland bench, so I may have to withdraw from any cases that involve ones that are sent from Rutland County Council.
Okay, thank you for that. And Councillor Harvey.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I have to declare an interest in report 125 of 2021, which is the Ofsted Improvement Board. I'm a member of that board, so I shall not take part in that debate. And
okay, so you'll mute yourself and turn off the video.
Yeah.
And then you can come back in. Okay, thank you very much for that then. Anybody else before I go galloping on? And gosh, Councillor Nick Beggy, how can I help?
I don't know if I need to declare that I'm an owner of a youth, and but it will not. It will not affect my debate.
Thank you very much for that. I'm an owner of a couple of youths as well, actually, surprisingly enough. So anyway, I don't think that's material in this context, but thank you. Thank you very much for your concerns, Councillor Beggy. So I think that concludes the declarations of interest. Petitions, deputations and questions. Have we received any, Jane?
None received, Chair.
Thank you very much. And any questions with notice from members?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Any consideration of any matter referred to the committee for a decision in relation to a call-in of a decision?
none received, Chair, and you've just missed one agenda out. It's the notices of motion from members.
I did, thank
And we
you.
haven't received any, Chair.
Good, that's why I missed it out, of course. So that's 6 and 7 covered. My apologies, everybody. The next item is item 8, which is appointment of a vice chair to the committee. This item is carried over from our last meeting. I have received one nomination prior to this meeting, and I'd like to propose and nominate Councillor Sam Harvey to be vice chair for the remainder of the 21-22 municipal year. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Andrew Brown. And are there any other nominations? I don't see any hands up. I don't see any. Good. In which case, could I now have a show of hands in support of the nomination of Councillor Harvey as vice chair of this committee? I think that's unanimous, isn't it?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Good. Okay. So thank you. Councillor Harvey is now appointed as vice chair of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. Thank you all, everybody. Still no sign of Paul, which is unfortunate. Paul Brown. What we'll do is we'll press on to item 9, addressing the impact of COVID on the education of Rutland children and young people. This item was primarily brought to scrutiny to address the very real concerns of our residents and is of immediate public concern. I'd now like to hand over the floor to Dawn Godfrey, our Strategic Director of Children's and Families, and Lizzie Packworth, the Education Development Lead Learning and Skills, who are going to deliver a report and a presentation. Am I right on that, Dawn? So over to you, thank you.
Yes, I'll do a very brief introduction, but actually we've got a whole host of our education colleagues with us this evening. So I'm not going to say very much at all because they're the experts, so I'm going to be handing over to them. But as you said, the Scrutiny Committee were interested and wanted assurances around the impact of COVID on our children's education in Rutland, but also the kind of impact of COVID in terms of their well-being as well. And so what we've done is, obviously you've had the report, but I will hand over to Lizzie, who will start the presentation, but then we've got our guests will be coming in from early years, our primary sector. We have Resilient Rutland with us, and we will also have some information from our secondary school colleagues as well, which Lizzie will present. One thing I will just say right at the beginning, and I'm sure everybody's read it in the report, but I did just want to remind members of Scrutiny that at 2.8 and 2.9 in the report, it is clear, we did make clear that education performance data is not being published by the Department for Education, either in the last academic year and for this year as well. So I just wanted to make that clear to members of Scrutiny Committee, because that, I think, is something that some members might have questioned, why that wasn't in the report. The reason is that the Department for Education has made the decision that academic outcomes for individual settings would not be published for the school years ending summer 2020. So I just wanted to make that clear. That's why there isn't actually performance data in the report. But with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lizzie.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I just checked that everybody can see the PowerPoint. Thank you.
Apologies to interrupt as well. I was going to suggest that if people who are presenting introduce themselves as they start their presentations, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm Lizzie Packworth. I have taken over as the Interim Service Manager for Learning and Skills. And we're going to present the report through people delivering their presentations. So firstly, we'll address what steps are being taken to address academic recovery, and also this will address what steps are being taken to provide mental health support for our young people. So firstly, I'm going to hand you over to Lucy.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can.
Yeah. I'm in some
Lucy,
internet
before you
troubles,
start, I'm
that's
just
why I
going
keep moving. My name's Lucy Lewin and I'm the founder of, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Sorry, Lucy. Lizzie, can you click from beginning on your PowerPoint so then the whole screen will come up for members?
Okay.
What can you see at the moment, Dawn?
Just the first slide. Jane, can you assist at all?
Yeah, Jane's taken over.
Bear with me. What? Right, Lizzie, can you unshare your screen, please?
Yes.
And what I'll do is I'll share it from mine.
Shall I start anyway on the basis that I don't have slides to go with me to catch up some of the time?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let me introduce myself then. I'm Lucy Lewin. I'm the founder of Little Angels Day Nursery in Uppingham. I'm here talking about the impact that COVID's had on the early years sector. And please, Dawn made the introduction, made reference to the fact that we are lacking some official data, because that was something that I wanted to raise first of all, because I think it's quite interesting that, you know, we're being asked to track and measure the impact that COVID's had on children, yet we've took away all of the data sources that we use. So we're not, you know, we're not doing the early years profile. We're not looking at children's good level of development score. So actually, I like this and I prefer this because what it's done for us in the early years is allow us our chance to shine. Because if the one thing we do in early years is it's always about relationships. And actually, although we can't give you a quantitative measure for that, I can give you a qualitative feel for what it's been like and what impact it's had for the children in the early years. Now, whether or not this is because we were technically closed for the shortest period of time, if you think 23rd of March to the 31st of May was when we were closed for everybody except key workers, but from the 1st of June, we opened our doors to everybody. And I'm very proud to be part of Rutland because I think our response was way above the national average with the amount of attendance we were getting across all of our settings in Rutland. And I think we really pioneered the way. We pulled together as a collective sector. We did that via local authority, weekly calls, daily announcements. We even had a WhatsApp group for all of the setting owners and managers. And what this allowed us to do was really create a sense of belonging for the children in the early years sector. We had virtual learning going on, so we pioneered that. That was us sending out activities and things for children to do at home. And as a result, what we've actually seen is, on the positive note, we've had children coming back to nurseries like they've never been away. We are seeing a new level of need around attachment behaviour. We're even having some kind of interesting things now around children and their response to food. I don't know whether maybe during lockdown, palettes were not as extensive as they would be, you know, if we were out in the real world. But actually, on the whole, academically, we are not seeing any tangible or even kind of quantifiable data that would say there'd actually been a huge impact from an academic perspective. Like I said, there is this new level of need now where The children won't be meeting the pre-COVID thresholds for support, things like early help. And definitely there is a new level of need around new parents and just how they find their new way in the world. But actually it's been an interesting time, but I do think that it was made better by the fact that we had such a short period of closure for the early years. I think it'll be interesting to see once we start reporting official GLD scores going forward, because I truly believe that what are we going to relate them to? I think we almost need to benchmark and start again, because anything that we had pre-pandemic isn't going to be held fair against anything post-pandemic. So on the whole, I think there is a new level of need, like I said, children needing support with more attachment. However, I do think this is more parents' detachment than children's attachment with us. But on the whole, you know, the children have been super resilient and there has been a lot of support for them out there. So that's me.
Thank you, Lucy. And now I'm going to hand you over to Sharon Milner.
Thank you. I have got slides, Jane, if possible. Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you very much. That's great. So my name is Sharon Milner. I'm Executive Head Teacher of the Brook Hill Academy Trust. So we comprise of Brook Hill Academy, Edith Weston Academy, so 2 Rutland academies, and South Witham, which is just over the border in Lincolnshire. So hopefully by sharing our journey, I think we're fairly representative of all the primary sector, and certainly we had a lot of dialogue throughout with our colleagues across certainly all of Rutland and into Lincolnshire and beyond. So hopefully it's quite a generic picture. So I'm going to start with kind of our challenges and the impact on our families and children, particularly in school. And just to say a quick note, some of these challenges are actually still continuing as we get more embedded into autumn term. But yeah, sorry, could I have my next slide? Thank you. Okay, so I think the main impacts for us were the disruption to schooling. Obviously, we went through 2 lockdowns, and the effect on really for the children, the social effect was quite noticeable, because obviously they weren't with their friends, they weren't mixing. So that's work that we've had to we're still picking up. So that the effect was certainly more noticeable. Possibly for the Key Stage 2 children, I think the little ones coped probably better than our younger children. The emotional, the social emotional was the biggest gap that the biggest challenge that we found as they came back. Academic, I would say during the first lockdown, either the quality of the virtual learning or actually the amounts, we noticed difference when the children came back more so after the first lockdown. The second lockdown, I think our remote learning offers across the board was so much better. Teachers were more confident because they'd had to learn very quickly new approaches to learning. And we did actually live lessons and we did recorded lessons, and it was much more easy to kind of, keep an eye on children and work with them and our families. From a staffing perspective, obviously we had staff members who were ill, we had staff members who needed to isolate for different reasons. So that created problems alongside trying to run remote learning and in-school learning for key workers. So these are just the challenges for now. The developing new skills, which I think teachers just got brilliant, they cope brilliantly with those. And also we had members of staff who were trying to balance actually home learning with their own children. So there was a lot of balancing going on for everybody. And obviously our families, there's a lot of uncertainty around, they were coping with lots of things. The curriculum review had to be done quite quickly because we needed to make sure that we were ready for this September for our gaps. But again, I think most of all 3 of our schools have reviewed our class groupings so that we can make sure those children get the provision they need to address the gaps that they will have missed. One of the big things for us, and it will be every other school, was just the whole lack of the proper school life. So it was the sports, the extracurricular, all those things that actually are so important in children's lives, and they all just came to a halt. So certainly when we came back in March of this year, trying to get school as normal as we could for certainly the year 6 children and well, all of the children, but just making sure we got those things back up and running as quickly as we possibly could. The risk assessments were just relentless. Again, we did meet with the authority with the regular meetings, and I think our SLT, there was a point where we were meeting daily. We kind of got to weekly because we were just getting very, very late information and having to make changes and having to make adaptations quite quickly. So again, you know, it was fine, but actually it relied on us really watching the news as much as anything and hearing things perhaps at the same time as everybody else, and then having to put plans into place pretty quickly. But we did have some positives. So if I could have my next slide, please. Because I think it is really, really important that we look at both. So I think I echo Lucy 100%. You know, I think we responded so well, and we did stay open for our key workers. We had considerably more children in the second lockdown than in the first lockdown. The guidance changed slightly, and in a way that put more pressure on us as schools, because actually we were really quite a balance between you know, teachers in small schools had probably half their class in, half at home, and they were having to try and juggle that. But I would say, you know, we certainly remained home. We did bank holidays, we did all of the holidays. We delivered hampers where necessary to families. So that was, and I you know, I would like to say that the quality of teaching and learning was as good as it possibly could be in the circumstances. So the resilience and teamwork, children especially, but staff, families, everybody there. We did keep on top of those dreaded risk assessments, and we are still doing them now. So that, you know, it's an ongoing, but they are in place. Safeguarding was a real priority for us. So we were in touch with our more vulnerable families through either having children in school wherever we could, and sometimes we actually made the decision that children, it would be better for them to be in school, and we worked with families to make sure that could happen. If not, we had kind of check-ins. Teachers would make phone calls. We did Teams meetings, so children. So that can't, you know, there was never a time when we couldn't check that families were accessing. They were registering every morning. They were accessing lessons. So we kept a very close view on that. And again, with the SEND and pupil premium, primarily I would say they were in school, unless they were children who they were vulnerable themselves, so they couldn't come in. We certainly in our trust had our SEN and our pupil premium children in, because we felt they needed to be in school as much as possible to you know, try and reduce those gaps. You know, they were already coping with social and emotional. So if we could keep the academic going, it would be better. The PHSE curriculum, a lot of work was done on that, and we were doing a lot of that when children were at home as well. We were doing drop-in sessions. I know Resilient Rutland, who are on in a bit later, they did support us with lots of resources and activities, and they were passed on to families and children throughout all of the Rutland schools. I think the local authority we supported well. The IT was good. We were able to access a large number of laptops, iPads, and so we were able to ensure that every child had access. If they didn't have it at home, we were able to provide laptops and iPads to make sure they could access remote learning. We also had our school secretaries became kind of a helpline, because like we found tonight, not everybody can log, it's not always easy. So we were, you know, we had staff in just to work with trying to get children logged on and making sure they could be part of us. And I will say, when we came back, we had so few bugs. It was incredible for the children in, because I think we're all obsessed with the hygiene. So children, that is not the case now. We have come back to a situation where I think now everybody's come back together. All those colds and bugs and tummy bugs and everything, they're all back, and we are noticing quite an effect just in the last week or so, actually, in all of our schools. But, you know, there really were some positives, and I think it is important to say that despite everything, you know, we did as well as I feel we possibly could. And our parents were they were very supportive. I think by the second lockdown, you know, everybody was finding it was getting to be people who had worked their own jobs, and they were trying to homeschool children. So there were some tensions there, but overall the support was there, you know, undoubtedly. Could I go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And these are some of our home learning things that were going on that children, we had quite a regular dialogue with websites and social media and whatever, which was good. So the learning gaps we found when we came back following the second lockdown were not as significant as during the first lockdown. I think we learned what the children had missed, and we were able to plug some of those gaps while they were still learning at home, which really helped. I think we've had to put and we are still doing it now, that focus on mental health and well-being. We're training extra ELSAs in all of our schools. They are the emotional literacy support assistants who do an absolutely amazing job. And I know they are very well supported through Resilient Rutland, but they are very, very busy because there has been impact clearly on children's mental health and well-being throughout this period. When we first came back, we really had a focus on the key skills in lessons. We did make sure we picked up our sport, and we tried to do as many, exciting activities as we could, but there was less for us to do. So those key skills were a focus. Thankfully, we're now back to proper school, normal school, and we're able to have that rich and broad curriculum. We were lucky enough, I've put in there because we actually appointed 2 head teachers. So throughout this, we did actually manage to recruit. And my understanding is across the primary sector generally, I think staffing, we were very fortunate. We had interviews, we held them differently, of course we did. But actually we are fully staffed, and we are, we were ready to go in September. So we were able to carry on doing those things as we normally would. Attendance was pretty good up until just the last few weeks, and we're actually finding, I think it is important to mention, Edith Weston has been very, very badly hit in the last week. We have 8 members of staff off with COVID currently, and that has been quite a significant shock to us. And we do currently have one of our classes accessing remote learning again. The good news is we were in a position to get that going straight away, but we actually didn't have any staff. So just having very confidently told you they're there, they are, but actually the COVID situation is still a concern for us. Brook Hill, we have, I think it's 4 cases across the whole school, and we have a school of 350. That's very good. Edith Weston is our smallest. In our South Witham, our Lincolnshire school, in February, we had 3 members of staff who were very seriously ill with COVID and were hospitalised for quite some time, and they are still recovering. So I think it is important to remember that actually the effects are still there, and the impact is, we still need to be very mindful and trying to sort of make sure that we're supporting our children as much as we possibly can, but actually we're supporting our staff as well, because obviously at Edith Weston at the moment there is a lot of anxiety and concern about the situation that they are in, and it's even worse when you've been through it with another school in the trust as well. The virtual lessons, there was 90% uptake across the board, and we were really pleased with that. And any children that were not accessing, we were still able to kind of make sure we had phone calls with them, and we sent different activities for them to take part in. So since returning, we put in additional sports as visits. We just feel the children have missed out so much on that whole being parts of teams, being part of a collaboration, and it's been really good. And the recovery curriculum is now in place. So we identified all the gaps and did a review in June and July, ready to put in a curriculum that will hopefully it will help us to make sure. We did our first set of moderation last night, and actually stamina for writing was something that we've identified. Reading comprehension has been something that we're having to work on, and maths problem solving. Children are really good at their times tables. I think the parents have enjoyed doing. There are some areas of learning that we've actually found work really well. And I think it's just also important to say there are 1 or 2 families who have really thrived through this home learning. So the requests for doing home learning, I think Lizzie would probably say as an authority, there have been probably more requests than we've had previously, and not necessarily heading in that completely, but we have had some children, it's actually worked really well for them, and they have made excellent progress. Not that many, but there have been some. So it's a really, unpicking it all. I'm a bit with Lucy, trying to get the data and unpicking it is going to be quite challenging. But overall, I feel that we're kind of heading on to going in the right direction. Sorry, I've got one more slide, and then I will give someone else an opportunity. Could I just have the next one, please, Jane? Thank you. Okay, so our key priorities, and this is certainly across our trust, and again, I am very certain I speak for all schools. So obviously the mental health and wellbeing for all is on all of our development plans as a key priority. Continued risk assessment. Pride and respect in school, just remembering, because children have forgotten how to play together in some instances. They have forgotten how to be together and to just enjoy being together. It was great for the first week or so, and then it started to, you know, the challenges were a bit more for them because they just haven't been together as much. So needing to do a little bit of work on that. Behaviours for learning as well, because I think the environment they've been learning in sometimes at home has probably been quite different to the school, where you're perhaps in a class of 30 with one teacher or a teacher and a teaching assistant. So it's all that remembering again, you know, our behaviour management and our behaviours for learning. Obviously, we're looking at least good progress for all groups, and we're monitoring that very carefully. We started last night with our first moderation. Attendance, we are, again, it is really quite difficult because there are a lot of bugs at the moment that children do seem to be quite poorly. Their immune systems, for obvious reasons, are reduced. So, you know, just making sure that we're really monitoring that. We've got interventions in place, curriculum coverage I've talked about, just that continued analysis of our vulnerable groups, because we really are hoping, you know, from what we've seen so far, that's looking positive. I think we've learned some really good lessons, so we do need to actually continue to our staff meetings now. Certainly when we have trust meetings, we meet virtually, our governors meetings. So there's lots, you know, there's some real positives that we need to be ready, that we can continue to use. The readiness for outbreaks, unfortunately, we've been tested already in the last week, that we have needed to have, you know, a plan in place. And obviously there is a new EYFS program out, so making sure again that program, as Lucy said, I think I would echo that. Our children generally, we're not seeing great, you know, a great loss of that time in EYFS. I think we consider our year ones to be quite vulnerable because they've actually missed a lot of their preschool and their reception year. And also we worry the year threes again have missed most of their key stage one. So it's just keeping an eye on that. And then finally, you know, just making sure we just get back to being a really solid community again, and working well together. And I'll be quiet now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to speak on behalf of Stuart Williams because unfortunately he couldn't make the meeting. So first, we're going to focus on the academic recovery. So staff training, focus on good teaching practices and the recovery curriculum. So that was a focus straight away. And students who needed further intervention were identified. And this is shown on a tracker system for each student within the school. Then it's broken down into different year groups. So there was a focus in year 7 and year 8 English. All assessments were completed in the first 5 weeks, and then targeted support through accelerated reader programme and curriculum time. So the year 8s had 35 minutes one-to-one sessions to address gaps. In year 9, they also used a reading intervention programme, and the pupil premium students also had 15 hours of tutoring through the national tutoring programme. Moving on to year 10 English, the English team identified students who needed further intervention, and then tutoring was offered for 1 hour per week by specialist subject teaching assistants. Moving on to maths, assessments were given to identify the students who needed intervention, and they were given an additional 70 minutes per week. In year 8 and 9, they were also given an extra 70 minutes intervention per week for all students who required it. And then into year 10, tutoring will be offered for 1 hour each week for any student who needs intervention. In science, students identified through assessments and tutoring was given if necessary. And then moving into year 11, robust interventions, including mornings, afternoon, and in elective sessions if needed. And there was the redistribution of support staff to support students who needed. And the most important thing was the quality first teaching. There's also a link that goes to the full report, but this is just a summary as well. Could you go on to the next slide, please, Jane? This is summarising the mental health support. So on the staff training inset day, they discussed mental health and the wellbeing that would be supporting students. The focus was on mental health and wellbeing in tutor time and electives time. And the client services team have identified students who need support with anxiety, mental health concerns, behavioural needs and other barriers. So that was identified really quickly. The college has also increased access to relate counselling, and an NHS worker is based within the college for 1 day per week. So CPD has been completed by staff to ensure that mental wellbeing is further supported, and the college is working with external partners to implement wellbeing projects, so things such as drop-in pottery sessions. Student Voice has strongly emphasised the desire to return to extracurricular activities and trips and visits, so they are being reintroduced. And students who have had to isolate, they're also receiving one-to-one mentoring for curriculum and wellbeing supports. Okay, that's that. And I think we're going to move on to Morag from Resilient Rutland.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to talk about the Resilient Rutland project. For those who know the project, you'll know we're coming to an end in July of next year. And so this academic year, we've got 3 areas of focus, which is delivery of the remaining work streams, evaluating our project impact, and implementing our sustainability plan. In terms of the impact on COVID on our project, it was far-reaching. All our work is done through the schools, so we provide support to the 24 schools in Rutland. That's the independents and the state schools. And so as soon as the schools closed, so did our route to the young people. So that was a major blow initially to our project. But being Resilient Rutland, we were creative, and we started to find alternative ways to reach our target market. What we found was that the virtual home working had meant the school's engagement was constrained. There was ongoing uncertainty, and things that we had planned in just simply couldn't happen for so many different reasons. There were bubbles, there were staff unavailable, and simply schools couldn't take any more activities. Sharon's mentioned all the risk assessments and all the other things that they had to do that were unexpected. Our project then had to be very measured in our expectations. What we tried to do was, working with the schools, was to identify how the work streams that were already in the project could change. So, for example, we supplied over 200 arts and crafts packs via the schools to families who needed them. Everybody was doing crafty things at home, but some young people didn't have access to that kind of material. And so that was something that was felt to be a really nice initiative. We went online. All our counselling that we provide in the secondary schools was moved to a virtual platform. So as much as possible, we tried to either continue the work streams we were doing or change the work streams to actually meet the needs of what was happening in the environment at that time. Our project is over a 4-year period. So we had a careful plan of how we were going to deliver our support. What we found with the pandemic was that there was a much quicker need. Immediate support was required, and that was required by the staff, the pupils, and the parents. So we started looking again things differently about the resources that we could produce. So we did things like a daily calendar based on the academic resilience approach, which is a whole school approach to mental health and well-being. So it was things that the schools could pick up. It was delivered to them online. They could just pick it up, print it off, and it was things that they could do on a daily basis to either instill a sense of belonging or core self, or just some basic things like good nutrition and still getting outside in the fresh air. Staff well-being was something that was also a huge challenge, and so my colleague Lynn Hart set up we call it a resource. It's a resource share. It actually became it was happening every Thursday evening. And people could just join the Zoom session and share their experiences. And we had people from across the UK you know, all over, and Rutland staff from the different schools, pastoral teams, Senkos, all kinds of people joining, and that still goes ahead now, and offers. We have guest speakers to come in and just really give people that support that they need, and they really did need it in those early days. We found that the people that we had identified to deliver our program, suddenly they were on furlough. They, you know, not only could they not go into a school, but they weren't available to even do things virtually. Training changed because it costs. You'd think that virtual training would be cheaper than actually delivering training in-house, but in fact they had to develop their online training. So costs in some cases actually went up. So you know, there were challenges in trying to juggle all these different aspects of the project together. And finally, motivation and morale, you know, it was a roller coaster, and it remains a roller coaster. On some days everything was going well, and on some days wasn't, and that was the same for us as project managers and trying to deliver Resilient Rutland as it was for the schools. So it was really about keeping that sense of community and belonging, that we are all in it together, and if we all help each other and share information and share that support, then the end outcome will be much better. I would say that the pandemic, in a bizarre twist, has actually made our project stronger, because we have been more creative. We have done things that we would never have had the chance to do before, and they've had such a significant impact. And it's just been, you know, just been wonderful to see. And now that we're actually back to having a more normal way of life in the schools, you know, this term already we've had the team building event at UCC, which was for their year 7s to instill a sense of belonging and develop the UCC community. We mentioned the pottery drop-in sessions at Catmus. You know, all these young people's initiatives are happening across the county. There's 51 different creative and sports activities going on in the primaries this year. So that, you know, there's so many things that are now scheduled and able to happen. You know, it's been really challenging, but we feel that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that we work together with our partners to make that happen. If you go on to my next slide, I'm not quite sure who's in charge of the slide. So for us, you know, I've just put this in, and to be very quick, that we've always tried to develop a co-production approach to Resilient Rutland. We're not going to tell people what they need. We're actually going to ask them and do our best then to work with them to create a programme that has real impact and delivers what people actually want and need to make their mental health and well-being better. You know, we hope that when we know we've built strong and trusted relationships with other organisations, because when you get to that point, it's just so much easier. Communication is easier, and things work better. We've learned that you have to be flexible. You know, who'd have thought that this would happen? But, you know, you've just got to pick yourself up and get on with it, be resilient, and think, you know, if you're having a bad day, you know, tomorrow's another day and things will change. You don't always need to reinvent the wheel. The arts and crafts packs idea came from a lottery funded project in Blackpool. She said they were doing it, and we said, great, what a fantastic idea, we can do that. And it's about sharing information and ideas, and I hope that we're a project that does listen, and people do feel that they can come to us with suggestions, and you know that, and then they will be genuinely considered. And finally, sometimes when everything seems to be crashing around us and the environment continues to be uncertain, sometimes you just have to stop and think why we're here. And our project is here to support the mental health and well-being of young people in Rutland. And we've got 1 year left. And, you know, we've got great partners and organisations that we work with. So I would say that we're positive about the future, and looking forward to what this more normal academic year will bring.
Thank you, Morag. I'm now going to pass you over to Bernadette, who is presenting on behalf of Steph Logue.
Thank you, Lizzie. Good evening, everybody. My name is Bernadette Caffrey. I'm the Head of Service for Early Help, SEND and Inclusion at Rutland County Council. And I'm here, as Lizzie said, on behalf of Steph Logue, who's not well this week. If I can move on, please. Thanks, Jane. I've just got a short presentation that describes two specific interventions which relate to young people's emotional health and well-being and self-esteem. So we've just picked these out because although these interventions were around before COVID, there was a particular focus and energy on supporting children's well-being. And the first one we mentioned there is IAPT. It's quite a mouthful, the Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. And we've got two trained practitioners in our service. The training was funded through the NHS. It's quite a structured clinical intervention. It's quite focused, and practitioners will work with young people from 8 to 18. And it's specifically around low-level anxiety and low mood, and with the intention of supporting young people so that they don't go into crisis, that they don't need a CAM service, for example. So supporting that low-level anxiety and depression. The practitioners have worked with young people on a one-to-one basis, and it's been very, I'm going to use the term outcomes focused. So constantly working with the young person around understanding what their concerns are, and looking at what outcomes they want to achieve, and working to quite a deliberate timescale with the young people. Obviously, with the opportunity to be able to extend that if it was needed, but generally keeping it as a quite focused piece of work. More recently, the IAPT interventions have been around our inclusion offer. In other words, supporting children's inclusion and return to school. And we've certainly seen an increase this term in children who have medical needs. And this term we've had 3 young people who presented with mental health, not COVID related, who we are supporting through our medical needs policy, which means basically those children may be on a school roll, but be accessing the hospital school or home tutoring. Thank you, Jane. We just wanted to illustrate a particular case that related to the IAPT work. And this was a referral that came in February. This young person had been struggling before, but their attendance declined quite considerably. And the young person felt that just lockdown just made it all a lot worse. And those anxieties about being able to join either virtual or live lessons became very, very difficult. And you can just see there what the young person said about how they felt during this period. And really recognizing that their education was extremely important to them, but the anxiety was getting in the way of them being able to engage in their education. Next slide, please, Jane. And what I thought it was interesting, what Lucy said about the importance of relationships. And I think Lucy said it's always about relationships. And I think that's the same whether it's the early years or it's young adults. And building that trusted relationship with somebody. And initially it might have been the practitioner, but enabling that young person to build up a network of support as well. What was important in this case was to help the young person to understand the triggers that cause that anxiety, and then looking at ways of managing that. It was a very close working relationship with the school. So the work that the school and the way the school was supporting the young person, the practitioner was reinforcing that in her time with the young person. We're very pleased to say that the young person is feeling much better and has re-engaged in education, and since September has had 100% attendance. And she describes herself as feeling much more confident about being in school. And would like, I think, has understood the sort of benefit for her. And what's great to hear is a young person wanting to support other young people in the same situation. Thank you, Jane. And I just wanted to mention mentoring, which is another offer in our services for young people. And we have 2 part-time practitioners who deliver mentoring with young people. And again, very much around the focus being around building a trusted relationship. And this has sometimes been being young people who've lost that trust, moving into adolescence and not feeling able to share how they feel, not being able to feel confident in relationships, even with their peers. So what's been really important, and one particular focus has been around healthy relationships. And that could be relationships with the young person's parents, their teachers, their peers, their siblings. So quite a lot of focus on how you engage. And I think it's been mentioned already. It's been easier for young people to disappear, to not feel confident about going out. And although many young people have said how important friendships have been, I think we've also seen young people being frightened to re-engage in friendships. The support, both the IAP support and the mentoring support, is available to young people. They can self-refer, or that might come through our children's any element of our children's services front door from our colleagues in schools. And again, typically the support will last between 6 and 12 weeks, but again, it depends on the individual young people. And just to next slide, please, Jane, just to illustrate this through a case study. This was a referral that came into the service in March this year. The young person was a year 11, so a critical year for this young person, who was feeling very worried about their future. And some of the anxiety was having an impact on their well-being and beginning to present with episodes of self-harm. And this, I think it reflects some of that global concern that we've heard from young people about, what's going to happen in the world, what's going to happen with the future. We heard so much about people who hadn't been able to work, the impact it would have on employment and training and so on. And this was a significant concern for this young people. The mentor put in place some really effective goal setting, which again, that focus, it's not about just holding that young person in that place and being their buddy, but it was about quite a directed approach to setting some goals, enabling that young person to get up in the morning sometimes, to have a bath, to engage with their friends, to go to school, and very much based on that, again, recognizing those triggers that made them feel anxious and putting in place some of those strategies. So the work with these young people was very much around emotional strategies, but also very practical strategies, how to help them to do their revision, to plan their homework. Obviously, just to conclude, this is very much led by young people, but clearly if there was a concern, if there was a safeguarding concern, or we felt it was important to share with parents, we would, but we're led very much by what our young people want from the intervention. Throughout COVID, the practitioners have found, as with everybody, has described those creative ways of working with young people. We had to rely quite a lot on virtual contact. We really encouraged children and families to utilize that online support, the NHS support. I got distracted by Lucy then. I'm sorry. She's having a much better time than I am. So really, but we did keep up the face-to-face, and where we could, we maintained that. And there was lots of walking. There was lots of walking and talking around the park, around Rutland Water, and the youth workers were doing detached work out on the streets in Uppingham and Oakham. And it was interesting, the response we got from young people who liked that. They liked the idea of a professional coming out and being on their patch. But I think I think the overall view was, whilst the virtual offer suited some young people very well, I think there was a lot of young people, I think Morag is nodding and would agree, they have missed the presence of a trusted adult, a safe space or a safe person to talk to. Just finally, I think Sharon mentioned homeschooling. We've definitely seen an impact of COVID, and our picture in Rutland reflects the national picture. We've seen a growth in homeschooling and elective home education in the last 2 years, from 4 children to over 40 young people at the end of the last academic year. We're really pleased to see that we've got a good relationship with families where children are being electively home educated. We're confident that they're receiving a good education entitlement, and we're pleased to see that we've had 7 children who have chosen to return to school. A couple of those felt much more secure that the vaccination program was in place, so they and their parents felt they could go back to school. And we've had 3 young people who returned to the same school that they'd been in before. So fortunately, there was a place for them to return to school. I'm just going to say, if you'd like further information, Steph's details are there. We can contact the early help inbox or look at the RCC website. We do have a collated information there around the health and wellbeing offer for children and young people, and we're just updating that, but it sort of describes all of the support around children and young people. And I think it's really important that we continue to promote the emotional resilience that young people have, but also the support that's around them, and that's available through them to all of the organisations that work together in Rutland. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette. Jane, I'm not sure if you'll be able to play the video, but there's a short video that outlines the summer camps and the health and wellbeing support that happened. Fingers crossed.
Well, let's have a look. Thinking about it.
It is.
Steam powered. Come on. The little wheel is going round. Oh,
That's the one.
Getting there. It's loading.
I don't think we've got any sound, Jane.
As part of this as well, encouraging other people to try.
I'm not sure whether it was just me or whether there was any sound coming through. But I think that, no, there was no sound, I don't think. But I think that's the end of the presentation from our colleagues. And I think it's now open to questions from members.
Just before we go to questions, could I, as David is the portfolio holder for Education and Children's Services, I wondered if you would like to comment, David, at this point on that presentation. I actually thought that was very informative, and I want to thank everybody for sticking with us tonight. I know you've had a very busy day, and to tack this on to the end is never an ideal situation. So I'd like to thank you personally about the presentation. We'll get to questions in a minute, and I know that bubble will probably burst, but David, I'd just like to invite you to say a few words, if you don't mind, sir.
Thanks very much, Chair. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all those who presented tonight. You did a cracking job, and you filled in the blanks that I know were sitting in that paper there. You put the meat in the sandwich, and I'm sure that all that information came across very well. The amount of work that all our schools and our settings have done over the last 18 months has been colossal. And I have to say, our team at RCC have done their best to help, but everything was under local control, really, at the schools. And you must all take a great big bow for, putting up with all the problems that came, finding answers and moving on. It was really, really good. And thank you for giving up your time today. Lucy, I hope your bicycles are working well at Uppingham.
I'm in lockdown for the second time. So my daughter had COVID for 10 days and now my son's got COVID. So the bicycles are very still at the moment, other than the one that's in my lounge that I stole.
Well, I'm really grateful for all your inputs, and you asked me to give an overview of where we were with children's. Paul, do you want me to do that now, or would you like to wait?
Ideally, David, I'd like to wait until we actually get to item 10, if that's okay with you.
Roger, then thank you for the opportunity to thank the team. Well done, team, and thank you all for doing so well. And Morag, thank you too. It was a great thing, and I know that the Children's and Young People's Partnership has been really working well.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Welcome, Paul. Yeah, you're on mute now, so but welcome in any case. We're going to crack on. I'd like to open the debate up to the floor now and see if there's any questions to come from the floor. I don't see any hands at the moment. Councillor Harvey, Councillor Beggy. Councillor Beggy, you've got your hand up. Thank you. Would you like to unmute yourself?
I had got my virtual hand up.
Yes, you have. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yes, I'd like to reiterate, thank you very much for those presentations, because I found there was quite a lot missing from the report, which have now been, a lot of those have now been filled in. I've got some specific questions about the presentation, if you don't mind, and then a specific question about the report. Going round in order that I've written them down, the first one was to Lizzie about CAPMAS. All of the year groups had additional access to further learning if needed, but the one that stood out to me is year 10 was worded slightly differently. Tutoring was offered as opposed to given. Was there a good percentage take up of that from those years 10 for English and maths? And I wonder why that was different to the other year groups where it was given as opposed to offered.
I'll try and answer that question. So tutoring was offered and it was taken up. So the students could take up the tutoring. And what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
Well, it was a question, was it, well, how much was taken up? I just wondered why it read as a compulsory for other years, but year 10 were being treated differently with offered, say, it seemed to think that it was voluntary.
I think it was just the wording. I think everybody was given it instead of it being offered. They did take it up.
Okay, so thank you. So while I have your ear, that was a very clear presentation about what was going on at Catmos. What about UCC and Casterton, and what variances there were between each of them? Was there a difference in standard of remote learning, and how will best practice across all 3 sites be brought together for the future?
I know that it was definitely the same standard across all 3, and they based it on the assessments that were taken as students returned. So they all took up, looked at where there were gaps, and then they addressed their gaps accordingly. So it was probably slightly different from each school depending on the gaps that were needed.
Have the 3 schools worked together to understand what best practice will be for the future?
Yes, and they also had monitoring visits from Ofsted, and that's where they shared good practice with online learning. And they've also got access to guidance. One piece of guidance is called What's Working Well in Remote Education and Catch Up, and they've used that as well to address the academic recovery. So they've used similar pieces of research to back that up.
Thank you. My next question is for Morag at Resilient Rutland, if that's okay. Just a quick point, because there's 2 things really. One relates back to the report, which maybe Dawn or Lizzie can answer, that we don't discuss private schools, even though those kids are under our guidance when in the county. But you say you worked across private and the state schools. Did you notice any specific difference between both settings, or any different challenges?
Well, of course, Uppingham is predominantly borders, so they had, a whole host of challenges trying to actually logistical, trying to get children backwards and forwards, and they and also children who were stuck here with guardian families that literally couldn't get home. Our offer is slightly different for the independents to the state schools. So whereas I can tell you that, for example, our referrals into our bereavement counselling went up, have gone up significantly in the last 6 months, because we don't offer referral services to the independents. I can't make a comparison of data. I know everybody's having, that they're all experiencing increased issues. It seems that the children who were wobbly before have, that their issues have in the main increased over lockdown. But it's tricky for me to really give any quantitative figures on independents and state schools. Okay,
thank you. My final question for now is for Bernadette. Where have you gone? I've lost you. Oh, there you are, in the middle. You mentioned a lot about a lot of the services that were available and gave some very good case studies. What there wasn't was anything quantifiable. Have you got any figures on any increase in mental health requirements pre and post and during COVID?
I would certainly say that we've seen an increase in referrals or contacts coming through into our children's services front door. That has increased. I couldn't say significantly, but I'm sure that if you wanted me to get you some precise.
No, I'm just after some.
Definitely. It's a very mixed picture, I would say, because we did a number of surveys with young people, and we were part of both a national and regional survey to ask young people about their emotional well-being and resilience. And I think it was to some extent a mixed picture. I think we were surprised in some ways that young people were quite resilient. But I think, as Morag said, those children that had vulnerabilities, I think COVID and isolation probably exacerbated that. We saw, for example, our young people, our young carers. They felt very alone. Virtual contact didn't particularly suit them, and they were one group that we very quickly put in place face-to-face work with them.
Thank you, Bennett. I've got one final question, and I don't know who's best to answer this. This just goes back to the report. In 3.6, we've had some very detailed presentations about a lot of the great work that's been going on. In 3.6, we refer to 2 Rutland nurses were inspected. One of those had a report which was classed as inadequate. I wonder why that's been admitted from the report. Why was it registered as inadequate, and what has happened to put that right in the meantime? Because these reports, I don't think we want to hear all just good news. We need to hear and understand what the bad news is as well.
I'll come in first, and then I'll hand over to Lizzie about the actual actions that have been and support that has been given to the early year provider that you're referring to. I can see at 3.6, obviously we have told committee that 2 nurseries were inspected. Yes, it doesn't say that one of them was graded inadequate. However, we did put a direct link in the report for committee members to read the full inspection reports for themselves. So it's certainly not a case of we're trying to hide anything. In terms of there's various reasons why an inadequate grading has been given, but what I will hand over to Lizzie in terms of the support and actions that we're taking to support them to get back to a minimum requires improvement, but obviously good or outstanding grading is what we're supporting them to achieve.
Dawn. Yes, so the head of service and early education and childcare lead have met with the managers to assure ourselves that concerns raised in the Ofsted report are being addressed. So they've got a transforming learning plan where they've got all the priorities for the setting, and this was shared and includes the local authority monitoring processes. So that will be face-to-face visits. Then they will be set in September, November and December, these meetings. They're undertaking assurance activities and offering feedback, support and guidance. So I know that the nurseries have had constant meetings since it's happened. They've had virtual meetings, and then they'll do in-person meetings to address those concerns. But I know that it's already happening and they've had a discussion so far about it.
Thank you. Could I just make a request through the chair, please, that I, like others, I print this off to read so I can write notes on it. So links aren't always that helpful, but particularly when there are issues that need to be flagged, whether or not they could actually be signposted within the reports as opposed to have to follow the links, because I said I printed it off and I didn't have my computer at hand at the time. I think it just make our job a lot easier. Thank you. Oh, you're on mute.
Chair, you're on
Chair,
mute.
you're on mute.
Oh, dear.
You're doing so well.
Yes, I was doing so well. Councillor Coleman, you have your hand up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No, thank you all very much for your presentations. All very good. I suppose probably the first sort of question I've got based on the presentation material is probably to Sharon. You mentioned obviously staff being off ill, things like that. Are we finding any sort of effects of something along the lines of long COVID with our staff? Are we having any sort of staff off for prolonged periods of time?
Yes, we have. We certainly, as a trust, have been quite significantly hit. Certainly between February and July, and even now we have people coming back on phased returns. We still have, across our trust, we have 4 members of staff who are still on phased return and are under long COVID clinics. So yes, it is posing a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. And I suppose my second question is going to be to Lizzie, actually based on the report. So at section 4.3.2, it says the content of the Wellbeing for Education Recovery Programme has yet to be finalised. How far is that away from being finalised, and is there a set date on that yet?
I don't know the date of that, unfortunately.
I can.
Thank you, Dom.
Yeah, sorry, Sharon, were you going to speak then? No. Yeah, I can come in on that. We're basically the Wellbeing for Education Recovery is the follow-on to the Wellbeing for Education Return. It's a kind of continuation. So we just want to make sure that our evaluation is detailed to make sure in terms of the Wellbeing for Education Return, so that we make sure that we continue the work, the support that's been working into the current academic year. So that will be done this autumn term.
Okay. Thank you very much. And having written a few risk assessments myself for COVID, working in a school over the past few months, I thank you all and I feel your pain. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Harvey, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I again want to thank everyone for the report. I do want to say that I find it unfortunate that it doesn't appear to be quite from an education authority perspective that I'd have liked to have seen so much. So whilst we always knew there was excellent practice going on within Rutland within this, and as you rightly say, the government aren't doing the assessment, so we have no data to quantify. We do know kind of from what residents have told us and things that it wasn't across the board. There were differences, and these reports and the subsequent presentation this evening doesn't actually show that and highlight that. So it would have been things like I would have quite liked to have seen was what the variance was on remote learning in year groups across schools and that sort of thing. So how many hours were young people getting online learning within their cohorts and stuff? And I know that is very hard to do, but it's unfortunate it's hard to scrutinise when you don't have the data, basically. And we can, as I said, I can go on from what residents have said to me and some concerns that were raised. And I know we have some fantastic practice out there, and some schools have done phenomenally well at keeping everyone in touch and so on. Some maybe not quite so good, and it's a shame that we can't see, and it probably was done, but we can't see where shared practice was used to maybe help improve some of that. And I can see Sharon wants to come in, so maybe she can come in and address some of that for me.
I think first of all to say that we did actually have very, very clear guidance from the DfE as to how many hours the children were able to access. So I would assume that most schools did work to that. You will have heard, we've had, for instance, one of our schools, very severe staffing issues. We actually then worked with other schools to provide that remote learning. We did that within our trust. I'm guessing other schools will have done the same. And certainly had we not been able to draw on that with our trust, I wouldn't have had any hesitation of approaching one of our other local schools, and we would have been very happy as well. But we certainly all had really specific guidance on the number of hours that the children needed to have access to, and the subjects as well. So certainly their literacy and numeracy, phonics, it should have been every day. Not everybody did it live. We were in a situation, because we did have small schools with staff trying to manage children in school and remotely, that actually some of their lessons, and we did this on request of parents as well, some of their lessons, they were recorded, so parents could perhaps do meetings and things they had themselves during the day, and then they could concentrate on home learning. So I think it should have all been there. We had a monitoring visit. We were one of the schools who had a monitoring visit, and seemed to be very much in line with the national picture, which is following the DfE. Yes, so there was guidance for us all.
Just to add to that as well, thank you, Sharon, that's really helpful. And just to add to that, just a couple of things. In terms of any just reassuring committee around vulnerable children, all of our schools were actually open. So we talk about lockdown and schools closing. Actually, schools were open not just for key worker children, but actually for our most vulnerable children. And I think that's really important to remember. So we did still have our most vulnerable children attending school throughout 1, 2, and 3 lockdowns. I think we got to 3. So that's one thing to note. The other thing, in terms of kind of assurance around children's learning and access to remote learning, whether that was live remote learning, as Sharon described, or a recorded type of remote learning, is 2 things. So as a local authority, we still meet with the DFE every Wednesday lunchtime, and throughout the whole period of COVID, and as I said, it's still ongoing. We are asked and have those discussions directly with DFE about what's happening within the education landscape in Rutland. And we have to offer assurance, but equally our schools themselves have can have that direct link too. Schools have continued right the way through the pandemic to make DFE returns, and sometimes that's been harder than sometimes harder than others. But equally, in terms of that sharing of good practice amongst our education sector and our early years sector, we've had regular, not just, and I know the sectors themselves have kind of met frequently to share what's working well for them, so that they're sharing their best practice amongst each other. But actually, as a local authority, we've been having, to begin with, it was actually very frequent meetings with our executive heads and our early years providers to kind of to offer them our support as a local authority and kind of share as much information as we got as quickly as we could. But unfortunately, as Sharon alluded to earlier, the BBC tended to be the first people to find out anything. But also it allowed us to have those kind of discussions about what's working and offer assurance too. So there has been a lot of activity, but although equally, take on board what you're saying, Councillor Harvey, in terms of having hard data is difficult at the current time.
Sam, have you got further questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Nick, your hand's gone down. Lucy Lewin, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of add on to that. I suppose, like I started my presentation with in the early years, we've got nothing to be producing data with. We can give you our attendance data, but other than that, we've got no other way of measuring anything at the moment. So it has all literally been sharing good practice. And again, we talk about remote learning, and Sharon mentioned how, there is guidance on remote learning. The only guidance for the early years is that we have to have a contingency plan in place should we go into a further lockdown. There isn't any details in what that looks like. There's no call for us in early years to have anything in place whatsoever regarding the continuation of learning should there be another lockdown. So it feels from an early years perspective been very reactive and kind of making it up as we go along. And then the guidance follows a little bit after. So yeah, it's been quite tricky.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I think it's been a tremendously difficult job, thinking on your feet, changing direction, taking the directives from DFE, all of which have been very demanding. And I think the thought of collecting statistics probably actually fills everybody with horror, but how wonderfully useful it would have been if we could have achieved something along those lines. But nonetheless, we are where we are, and I think we can take the qualitative assessment that says, actually, we've all done very well. So once again, I'd like, any more questions? Councillor Beggar, you have your hand up.
Just through you, Chair, I wonder if you felt it appropriate, maybe at the end of the academic year, we got a very brief update about outcomes of all the great actions that we've we've heard. Nothing obviously as long and detailed as this, but it'd be good to just make sure we're still on top of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. What we'll do is we'll cogitate on that a little bit, and then we'll actually talk about it in a pre-meet or something, Nick, and then we'll see what it is we might or might not want. We've got quite a busy programme before the end of the year, so I'm just conscious about that. Councillor P. Brown, Paul, you're on mute. Oh, I've said it to somebody else. That's absolutely perfect. You're still on mute. You're still on mute. There we go.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
It's a question for Morag Tyler. I understand that you say that your program is coming to an end in July 22, and that you want to identify elements of the project you feel need continuing after that period of time. Will you be presenting will you making a presentation to the Rutland Scrutiny Committee, and because it's not on the work plan?
My sustainability. So I have a very comprehensive sustainability plan already written. So all our work streams, as you say, we've gone through each of them to identify in what context they should go forward, and we have agreed an ideal outcome for each of those, and we have actions set out for different agencies that we need to speak to. So that is shared with all the other organisations that we work with, the EIP partnership, other sections of the council. So it's a document that can be made available. If you'd like me to present what that is, I'm more than willing to present what that is. I haven't been asked to, but I certainly can. It is very comprehensive. So we've got a year left, and we've already started on the potentially we can go back to the lottery for the funding for some of the elements, but we know there are lots of other ways to make sure that we carry on the legacy.
I think that's something we can think about, unless you're able to share a report at some point.
Yeah, I've got one. Yeah, I have version number 7 at the moment, which I'm very welcome to share with you.
Yeah, I think that may help us in our deliberations. I think so. That would be useful. Paul, have you got supplementary?
No, I'm quite happy with that. And as long as we're getting something and know that it's going forward, and there is means to do that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andrew Brown. Andrew.
Thanks, Paul. Just a quick one for Morag. What is the makeup of Resilient Rutland? Who actually sits on it? Have we got a list, or could you send us a list?
Well, we're Rutland First Community Interest Company, so that's the body that manages the project, and so we're lottery funded to the tune of 484,000, which runs out officially on the 29th of January 2023. But we're winding up next July because of different changes in the budgeting structure. So we have our governance structure is Rutland First CIC board. Then we have a steering group, which is made up of members from the council, schools, public health, and then there's 2 employees, myself as part-time project manager and a school liaison officer part-time as well.
Andrew, you happy with that? Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I just want to say again, I'm just really so appreciative of all the hard work that's gone to both this presentation and all the work you've done throughout the pandemic. So before we move on to item 10, I'd like to ask Dawn whether you feel, and anybody else feels, that we actually need to keep these hardworking professional educators present for the rest of the meeting, or whether we can let them go.
That's why I suddenly put my hand up to suggest that we say thank you very much, but they can enjoy the rest of their evening in peace.
What there remains of it, yes. So,
absolutely.
Thank you all very, very much. And please, sorry, Nick, did you? No, just saying goodbye. Okay. Thank you, everybody. By all means, please leave if you so wish. You're welcome to stay as well, of course, if you wish. I saw Lucy, you were trying to eat earlier. Okay. Well, thank you all very, very much. And without further ado, we'll move on to item 10, which is the update on the Children's Services Ofsted Improvement Plan. Now, Councillor Wilby, as the chair of the Children's Improvement Board, would you like to speak before or after the presentation?
Yeah, I'll get in first if I may, as you asked me to give an overview of Tour de Ries.
Sure, thank you.
I'll give you a view of Children's Services from my position. Children's Services was not in a good place. Plenty of enthusiasm and care, but our systems lacked process and attention to detail. It picked up well under Dawn's direction and much excellent work by Emma Sweeney taking over in operational control. I honestly felt that our monthly improvement boards gave too much extra reporting for Emma, but Dawn knew that this was a very important and challenging area, and we had to be seen to be keeping a watchful eye on progress. Emma spent much time and effort to establish new training and procedural improvements, particularly in the audit trail of timely and accurate reporting. When Emma left on maternity leave, she passed the baton of responsibility to Lydia Bennett, who is with us this evening. This has been a seamless transmission of control, and we have been very lucky to have such an effective lead practitioner to hand. And Lydia, thank you very much for the great job that you're doing. We have filled empty posts and injected some new blood, well briefed, to take forward new ideas. But as always in a small organization, we must look after and build our team well. In particular, we have been enormously grateful to accept our young graduating students into the fold. Their work has been hugely enthusiastic and very effective, and I hope that most will stay with us for a long time. We all, and especially John Herbert, have tried hard to give more importance to the child's voice. This has been informative and given more vibrancy and reality to needs and results. The Children's Centre has worked well during lockdown, and our staff have made the most of virtual domain and innovation to look after our families, and have set a firm foundation for more normal operations as it opens to visitors again. And I know that will be a very welcome facility. I have been particularly pleased with the recent meetings of our Children and Young People's Partnership, and we are working well with a wide variety of partners like Morag Tyler and Resilient Rutland, who you've just had on, throughout Leicestershire and the Rutland region. Our meetings are now an interesting mix of data, transfer and best practice. And I stress the best practice. Our corporate parenting board is also working well. And perversely, during lockdown, the virtual world gave us better connectivity with our young people. Our new virtual head, Lee Martin, has been a tremendously enthusiastic and caring shepherd. He has brought much innovation to bear using his wide experience and range of contacts. And in that clip from the football, you will notice Leicester City in there. Well, mainly that was through Lee's chatting up the folks there and establishing a good bond. In the background, we have had our other lead specialists from the education and special needs fields. Jill, Lizzie, Bernadette, Louise, and Caroline Creasy. They have all contributed passionately to help our ship navigate the challenges that abound. Not least, we have a caring and experienced parental group who add much to our understanding and keep us abreast of both good and bad news stories. And thankfully, Nick, the former are in ascendance. From my regular meetings with colleagues from our larger neighbouring councils, I can report that we are all experiencing the same problems across the board. But although our staffs are smaller, so is the size, shape, and financial cost of our burden. We are also able to benefit from the gleaned best practice and their louder voice up the chain to government. In sum, I'm heartened by our progress, and I'm very proud of our team. We need to sustain our improving performance, and we must be prepared to show flexibility and understanding as we deal with the inevitable difficulty that appears out of stage left, in what is without doubt a financially restricted environment. You might be pleased to know that I managed to squeeze through Cabinet this week an extra amount of money to pay for the education psychs and the contract that we need to take us through for the next couple of years. That was despite SABS bashing away. I had to wear my armour to get that through. Finally, given a fair wind, I am confident that we will meet the next challenge from Ofsted with a straight bat and to good effect. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much indeed. Clear and concise, very good, thank you. I would now like to hand over the floor to Dawn Godfrey and Lydia Bennett, our Head of Children's Social Care. Interim, it says here.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
As before, obviously, everybody has received the full report in advance, so I'm not going to take everybody through the report because I'm assuming everybody has read it. Lydia is going to do a presentation though on some of the kind of key highlights that we thought was important to bring your attention to. So both in terms of our performance, quality of practice, and moving into key priority areas. And then obviously we will take questions as you wish, but with no further ado, I shall hand over to Lydia.
Evening all, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. I have to say I'm not a Zoom person. I've just become a master of Microsoft Teams over the years, so I'm trying to share my slides.
If you go, your slides are shared, I think, aren't they?
Are they on the full screen? Yes.
If you go to slideshow and then at the top.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Lovely.
Perfect. Thank you all for allowing me to take a bit of your time today to just share some of the improvements that we've made some progress on in the last 10 months, I would say, that have been really consistent in children's social care. I'm just going to really try and focus on championing the work of children's social care, and that's important to note and maybe to hold on to. I came into Rutland as an interim service manager actually in April of 2020, and then moved on to covering maternity leave for Emma Sweeney, as you've just heard, on a very steep improvement journey. Having worked in various local authorities to support the improvement plans, I think with social care, we're very good at focusing on the deficits, focusing on what's not working and what's going wrong. And actually, it can be very difficult to see the woods from the trees and actually identifying what is it that we're doing well? What are those bits of work that we're making progress on? And how do we build on those and take that forward? So as a service in the last 10 months, we've focused exactly on that. It's had a significant impact on staff morale, actually showing, whilst there's a lot of work to do, and there's definitely a lot of work to do as we strive for excellence, there is some positives and what I would call some green shoots coming through. There are 4 areas that I will want to talk to you about and just some highlights. One will be around our performance, our quality of practice, our compliments and complaints, where we are as a service today, comparative to where we were before, and certainly my own personal experience of when I walked into the service. And then, of course, as I've mentioned, there's absolutely areas for development. we're not where we need to be, but what I can say, there has definitely been an improving picture month on month going forward. And certainly between the periods of April to where we are now, it's been about sustaining that good improvement. And then I'd like to end as well with a video diary with a group of social workers, social work assistants, where you'll just see the passion and how proud they are of the work that they do, and actually very proud of working for Rutland. In terms of performance, I will dissect this in two areas. The service covers the front door, but also what we call the long-term teams. The front door is the part of the service where the initial inquiries, safeguarding inquiries come through, whether that's phone calls, referrals coming in from partner agencies, police, schools, health, members of the public calling in for help and support, anonymous referrals, families ringing in themselves, or even young people can make direct contact with us. So the front door is very critical. Every front door across the country has a timeliness in terms of performance capability. And our front door, we work on a 24-hour turnaround where we have that sense of urgency in terms of responding to need, so our families are not kept waiting. What we've seen is that we've been persistently in the high 90s, I'd say since perhaps 8 months ago. And in July 21 and in August 21, we've achieved 100% timeliness on all our outcomes for those initial safeguarding inquiries. And the data you have in front of you in the papers, it doesn't give you a sense of the numbers, but just to give you a sense of what we deal with on a month-on-month basis. It averages around 125 inquiries that come through the front door. And just to get a sense of the teams and the makeup of the team, Councillor Wilby has already alluded to small but quite effective teams. We're talking about 2 to 4 practitioners at that front door. So if you think about 125 safeguarding inquiries coming in, turning them around within 24 hours, that includes a robust management oversight, includes a robust risk assessment. That means collating intelligence from police, from health, from all other relevant agencies, whether that's probation, liaising with our early help as well, and turning and really making decisions about what is the best outcome for that child and that family and moving that forward. So that has been a real positive, and it's the first time we've managed to achieve 100% on all our contacts. The second indicator, re-referrals, is quite an important one because that tells a picture about quality and it tells a picture about a depth of our assessments. So when we talk about re-referrals, it's really around that revolving door at the front door. It's where we have families that come in, we provide maybe a quick short burst of intervention and support, but perhaps the quality of that work did not address the original need. So a family would have come in for perhaps physical chastisement, for example, and the parents needing a little bit of guidance around other strategies, positive strategies to gain good behaviour. But our assessment would then focus on school attendance, because then that becomes an issue that crops up and we completely forget to address the original need. So what we used to see certainly a year ago when I did a piece of work around these audits of repeat referrals is we were having our children coming in again and again with repeat safeguarding inquiries for the same reasons. So we started looking at the quality of our work, but looking at the depth of our work, the depth of how we're engaging at children and families. And what we're now doing is using this full assessment timescale, which is 45 working days or 3 months, to really build relationships, understand the need, and really do a really good family plan to make sure that the changes they make are sustainable. As a result of that, since April of 2021, we haven't seen that revolving door. So we have not had any repeat referrals for our families that we're working with. And what we're seeing is that they're making sustainable changes from the family plans that we are making with them. There is a bit of work that we need to do around the repeat referral. That data has a lot of variables, and on reflection, there is some work to do in terms of, are they coming in through other means, but really for low-level concerns, therefore does not really meet the statutory threshold for our involvement, but actually there's some low-level needs. So I'd really need to look at that and find out where the needs are coming back to, if not our service. Holistic joint decision making, you've heard our front door described as a joint front door, and that's because at the point of contact when a family comes into our service, our early help are there, statutory social care are there, and we're collectively putting our heads together, trying to find the best outcome immediately. Is it the low level tier 1, tier 2 threshold for early help, or is it statutory intervention? And we make that joint decision so there's no delay in terms of transferring to the appropriate service. And we consider our long-term teams, which are child in need teams, our child protection teams, our children looked after team, and our through care team, which is for our care leavers. There's been a really good positive picture here emerging. All our children and family assessments, again, in terms of timeliness, continue to improve. April seems to be a marker where there's been a really good indicator of sustaining good performance. All our assessments are completed in time, 100% since April, which is really good. We have about, on average, 100 to 130 child in need assessments within the service per month, but not all of them need to be completed month on month. So on average, we have about 15 to 20 assessments a month that need to be reviewed. And we're doing this within timescales. And that means our families are not waiting. They're getting an outcome that's appropriate. And we're moving on and implementing support in a timely manner. All our child protection conferences are convened within timescales. Again, this is a national timescale that we have to adhere to, a government timescale, and that's 15 days within from notification. So these are children in acute need. So where there is a need to escalate to child protection status, actually those are the children that timeliness is very important. And we've been very consistent in our timescales for these children. Our numbers are low, they're comparatively low to our statistical neighbours, and even more so why there shouldn't be any cause for delay. Placement stability, very good picture in terms of our children looked after. We've had in the last 6 months, 13 children and young people who have left care for a number of reasons. We've had some very good news stories about 2 children who've recently been adopted. We've had 3 children who've been awarded special guardianship orders, and this will predominantly be within family settings. We've had 3 children who've turned 18 and moved on to a through care team. And we're now beginning to start to see some staying put arrangements with some of our care leavers. So we've had 4 young people who've continued to remain with their foster carers throughout adulthood, which has been very positive. Just in terms of performance, actually to note, this is just a very quick whiz tour, but our month-on-month performance KPIs, there are about 50 or so KPIs that we really have to measure on a month-on-month, and I present and report at the improvement board, of course, in terms of performance of those. And there's 2 KPIs that have been the bane of our lives. They've been persistently either on red or there's been improvement and a dip. And one of those has been completing strategy discussions within 24 hours, the writing up of those minutes. We've definitely now in the last 4 months, I'd say, managed to get over that. And we've been sustaining that 100%. The other KPI that we seem to be struggling with is a timeliness of sharing these child protection conference reports with our families. I think sometimes what we tend to do is focus on the quality of the work and getting the report absolutely perfect and right for the family, that we negate giving them adequate time to review the document, to make sense of it, to digest the information, digest our concerns, and feel prepared when they come to the meetings. So the timescales are 3 working days before any child protection review conference. On the vast majority of cases, we usually, the ones that we miss that performance indicator, we usually give a family 2 days to prepare. So not completely, you know, the families don't have time to prepare, but because our numbers are very low, I think that's one of the areas we really need to improve on going forward. In terms of quality of practice, what I will say is that testing the quality of our frontline services has been high on the agenda in the last year. You've heard about a new framework for quality assurance. We've been involved in contributing to this. We were initially doing month-on-month audits, but actually trying to triangulate the learning for the service. And the decision was made to have a thematic framework, which was quarterly. And in doing so, making it a lot more robust. So these bullet points that you see there are the stages in which we complete our quality assurance. So we don't just look at the case file and the quality of the work on the case file, which is a practice reviews. We also now are triangulating feedback from our children and families, which is extremely important. And that goes towards developing that learning culture that we're striving to build. Tell us how we're doing our job. Tell us the impact that our work is having and our interventions are having in your life. Are we improving safety? Is there anything we can do better or improve on? We're also getting practitioners' feedback in that process. How has this work affected you as a practitioner? Are there any gaps for development? Could we have done anything better? And there's also supervision observation. So myself as a senior manager and the service manager would then observe the team managers and how they're developing their workers within this framework. And of course, we've got our director who's observed many case studies or observations of practice. And I'm sure Dawn would agree that she's had a very positive experience in terms of our journey and how we're moving forward. There's regular support and challenge and coaching from an increasing and stable management team. That's very important to hold on to because it really feeds into workforce retention. You'd have seen from the report about our workforce stability, and the picture that's emerged is a positive one. It's a recent positive picture because I'm sure you'd be aware of the previous churning of staff and members of staff coming and going and not really staying, particularly at the management level, service manager, team managers. And that has been one of the things that has really hindered our improvement progress, I would say. And that similarly has been the main contributing factor why in the last sort of 10 months, there's been that quick turnaround to progressing some of these areas of practice. Because the workforce is stable, we can embed our way of working, we can develop service culture, we can develop what it means to be a social worker in Rutland and really embed that in teams that are stable. I've mentioned my monthly tracking progress through the improvement board. That's really important because we're also not just marking our own homework, we're accountable to the improvement board, which Councillor Wilby, Councillor Samantha Harvey and Chief Executive and Dawn also sit in as well. In terms of our key findings from our recent audits, one of the main areas to celebrate that was highlighted in our Ofsted report is the voice of the child and actually hearing the lived experiences of our children and families. And we've really, really made some significant progress in this, not just in the assessment teams, all the way through to our children looked after and our care leavers through their life story work. So the direct work with children has become a real significant strength. There's many tools that we're using to elicit our children's wishes and feelings. And one of the tools we've sought to focus on and to perfect. So I'm a very big believer of not oversaturating a service with too many variables, options. So we identify a number of tools that we want to really practice on to perfect. and to utilize a skill set within our case studies. And one of those is words and pictures. And there's been some really, really good case examples of how we're using our signs of safety practice model, using words and pictures to explain and describe to a child or young person why we're involved, checking that they understand why we're involved, allowing them to contribute to the plan, and allowing them to actually say to us, how will you know we've made a difference? And that's all in the plan. And the language that's used is it's writing to the child. So we've really done a lot of mental shifts from that social work professional jargon to really writing to the family and to the child in a language that they understand. Our thresholds are applied appropriately. So with a strong front door that I described earlier, what we're now seeing is they set the tone and they set the pace for what happens to our families as they move through the social care system. So where thresholds are applied appropriately, that means our cases are managed at the right level. And to just give you an example in terms of contrast from where we were 16 months ago, maybe when I started in Rutland, we had a large cohort of children looked after, but no child protection cases and no really any new child in need cases. So we were going from the first point of contact all the way to child in care. And so we've really worked hard to really level that up in terms of proportionality. And that comes into what is our approach to families? Is it support and need, or is it safeguarding? And there's been a lot of reflection in terms of, are there some risks that we can manage within the home with the right level of support, and testing that out and enabling the families to increase safety and parent differently. The quality of permanency planning is good. We've now got clear and detailed discussions which are collated formally. I started by chairing the permanency panel meetings fortnightly. That was to ensure all our children looked after were updated with their plans, their care plans. And these meetings now have continued and they take place on a monthly basis. We've got good multi-agency working and recording of agency views. That's very important because for a long time, we were completing our assessments, self-reporting from our families. So self-reporting in terms of, speaking to the parent or one parent. And with our Rutland families, what we tend to find as well, there's a little bit of complexity within the family structure. So some parents who are involved in the child's parenting or co-parenting might live at different demographics. So not both parents are in Rutland, but we would just engage with the mum or with the dad in Rutland. And our reports will be what they tell us about what's going on for that family and with the child. And what we've gotten really better at is triangulating that. Not saying we don't believe the account of the family, but actually what we know from case histories and all the lessons learned in social care is intelligence from partner agencies is extremely important in terms of giving us that holistic view of what is actually going on for the young person and the child and their lived experiences. And that in turn then means the outcomes and our plans are better informed and more targeted. The strategic priority to provide support and intervention as part of the assessment process is becoming embedded. So I've just given that example where as a case has come in, we're immediately looking for the intervention and support that we can put in place, not at the end of a process, but during the process. How do we test those capacity for change? How do we test the motivation to parent differently? And that should be that is social work, and it should be part and parcel of what we do. Moving on swiftly to compliments and complaints, this continues to be a positive picture, I would say. Just reviewing some of the data from Q4 2020-21 and Q1, what we've seen is the numbers of complaints have continued to decrease. And actually what I've seen operationally when I walked into the service, there was quite a number of legacy complaints. So again, timeliness for complaints is extremely important. That means our families feel listened to. Complaints might not necessarily always be accurate, but it's a matter of perception. It's how they've perceived that particular service or that particular interaction with a member of staff. So our timeliness has absolutely improved. The way in which we're engaging our families and those depths of practice that we've improved on has enabled us to create better relationships. So where we are now is we haven't had any complaints in the service for several months. We do have just the one within the service. It's been a long complaint that cuts across a few services, but it is the one. But what we have done is build better, more transparent relationships with our families, and we've built that confidence with our workforce, where they're able to have those challenging conversations in a way that's reflective and addresses the needs. So just to give you a few examples, the complaints we used to get used to be about our practice, used to be about actually, you've put this in the report, you didn't talk to me about it, you've addressed this area of need, you've got this information, I didn't give consent for that, and we actually didn't talk about X, Y, Z. What you told me, everything was fine, and now you're escalating the case. It was those sort of complaints which on the one hand can be quick wins, but what we realized as a management group is it wasn't a lack of willingness to have those conversations by a member of staff, but it was a confidence issue. Actually, these are really difficult conversations. How do I approach it? How do I be transparent? How do I say, I'm really worried about this? How do you think we can get from A to B? And what steps do we need to take? And we've done some really, really good team building and pieces of work. And you can really see that now. A case example where one of the concerns that was raised was to do with school refusal, poor school attendance. And when the practitioner went into the home and did the partner agency checks, which was very important, and triangulated all the intelligence, other things came up actually, which was not on our radar at all, to do with a stepfather and his history, being a sexual offender, Schedule 1, and we addressed that even without it being part of the originating concern. And to just see that confidence grow and do those pieces of work was really, really positive to see. The next slides you will see are just some quotes that have been captured, what some of our families have said the impact of our work has been for them. And these are recent, they haven't been dug out like 20 years ago. They're recent quotes. This is what some of our young people have had to say. So my last slide before I finish with the day in the life of a social worker video is coming back to where we are in our improvement journey. We're definitely striving for excellence. I'm not even thinking that we're talking about good or outstanding. We're striving for excellence, and we do have a long way to go. But what I can say, and hopefully what you've heard, is an improving picture. And we're now beginning to sustain those improvements. It's quite a bit to go in terms of consistency. So one of the areas we're looking at is how we improve quality and consistency for all practitioners. You'll find that there's some practitioner who will really adapt very quickly to the new ways of working. So you'll be familiar with the signs of safety, which is a practice model that we have committed to in the long term in Rutland. It's a relationship model that involves a rethink in terms of our writing, in terms of our risk assessments. I've spoken about writing to the child. That's a skill in itself. It's almost writing a letter to the child, but in their own words. And there's some members of staff who've really grasped that really, really well. And they're writing whole assessments to the child, they're doing whole plans to the child. And there's some who are struggling to shift from that professional language that we're so used to. So it's really making sure that we build on, coming back to my earlier point, it's very difficult on an improvement journey to pick out those really good pieces of work that are dotted around and really build on them across the piece and across all of social care. In terms of signs of safety, it's been really positive to see how the end of our journey, you know, our care leavers, they're also using that in their service, thinking about signs of success. What does that mean and what does that look like? Writing to the young person as well on their case file, I've been able to see that, which is really good. Management oversight and supervision has significantly improved. Part of the reasons for this is a combination of things. A threshold at the front door means the right children are coming in the service. We now have a handle on our care plans. We've created the spaces for doing some really meaningful and good pieces of social work. And there's time and space for reflective practice as well. But what we need to see now is that embedded and threaded through every case where workers feel they've got purposeful guidance in terms of what they need to do. Plans are being reviewed. We've spoken about a quality assurance framework, but I know there is ambition to do learning circles, which include wider partner agencies. So our quality assurance it's in-house, it's within our services and within our organisation, but it's actually expanding that because our work really is multi-agency and improving those learning circles to our health, police, probation. We need to continue to develop the framework for practitioners in working with contextual safeguarding. This includes wider safety planning and identification of other vulnerable children. In Rutland, we started the Rutland Exploitation Panel in April of 2020, which I chair. We've got really good attendance from our local schools. It's been very good to have a separate panel that's not embedded in the LLR because our profiling is slightly different. We're able to identify what our local needs is in terms of vulnerabilities and exploitation, whether that's child sexual exploitation or child criminal exploitation. That's been a really good piece of work, but it's just to continue to make sure that that remains on the agenda and to promote that awareness. The service to remain ambitious in increasing the role of children and young people in co-chairing their reviews. To reduce the changes in social workers for our children. This is an important one. It's always a recurrent message of what our families and children tell us. They don't like to start their stories again. They don't like to build new relationships again, and that's quite understandable. And there are times where, changes of staff and retention can be out of our hands, particularly if we have a cohort of agency workers. But again, as I reiterated earlier, we've worked really hard during COVID. We've been recruiting, and we do now have a permanent workforce across the piece, except for one role, which we will be recruiting to. And in terms of workforce retention, we've also recruited a principal social worker who will be focusing on that career development for our members of staff. We know that in Rutland, being a very small organisation, sometimes that linear trajectory of progression is not available, unless, for example, somebody leaves and the post becomes vacant. So it's really thinking creatively of how do we retain our staff. But underneath all of that is all the bits and pieces that I've mentioned about how we're working really hard behind the scenes to create that culture that allows good practice to thrive and where social workers want to be. We also need to improve the uptake of independent advocacy for children at child protection conferences. think historically we've been very good with our children looked after, but our children and child protection conferences is an area of work that we really need to focus on. And lastly, celebrate achievements of our young people, and to hold annual celebrations of success events. We've had our first success event celebration in September, which was very well attended by our care leavers and children looked after, and it was really positive. Finally, in closing, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. And if I can share with you a video of some of our members of staff, and as you'll see, as I noted earlier, just the passion of their work and passion for working for Rutland.
You might have to stop sharing your other screen.
Yeah, and share your other screen, Lydia, because we can't see it.
Am I sharing multiple screens? Okay, hold on. Hold on.
So if you stop sharing.
Okay. Have I stopped sharing the PowerPoint?
Not yet.
No.
It was always going to do that, wasn't it? Okay. Yes, it's in bold red. It says stop sharing.
So if you now run the video and then click share screen, and you can pick the screen that your video is running on.
Got it.
Yeah, there we go.
You might need to turn the volume up.
It's on full.
Yeah, we had this issue with mine as well, didn't we? I will put the link, the video into the minutes, and then people can view it themselves.
Yeah, that's probably best. I would say I would really encourage members to watch the video because it is absolutely fabulous, and it makes me incredibly proud to be the Director of Children's Services in Rutland. So I would absolutely encourage you to watch it.
Okay, is that the end of your presentation, Lydia?
That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that very detailed report. That was very insightful, and it's a shame we couldn't watch the video, but there we go. Anybody? I'm going to open to the floor now. Do we have any questions from the floor? We've got two hands up. I didn't see who went up first, but I'm going to go straight to Andrew Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Clearly, what Councillor Wilby said at the beginning was absolutely true. So, Lydia, that was a brilliant presentation. You're obviously doing a really good job. You mentioned about children when they turn 18, and then you said something about the Through Care team. I don't really know what the Through Care team is. Maybe you could just tell me.
Through Care team is it's actually a newly restructured team within the service. So the Through Care team is really where the cohort of our care leavers are supported. So children who have been in long-term care in the local authority, and once they're turned 18, deemed to be an adult and no longer have the child looked after status, they then become care leavers. So the Through Care team, and why it's called the Through Care team and newly restructured team, was really around transitions and supporting children who've been in long-term care for a long time to transition and prepare them for adulthood from an early stage, actually. And that's what maybe we were not doing very well previously. We would have a cohort of children who've been in care, children looked after, and all of a sudden they're 18. And it's like, oh my goodness, right, okay, so they need to live independently or they need to do something else. But that preparedness for adulthood had not really been embedded or taken place. And we recognize that. And what we are doing now is actually not waiting for 16, 17, 18. The transition to the through care team is for all children 14 years plus who've got their permanency concluded. So at the 14-year mark, and they've got full permanency, we work really closely with foster carers or their carers, and to start really doing preparedness for that next phase of adolescence. Not necessarily that they will go and leave alone. And I think that's what we're trying to demystify. Preparedness for adulthood doesn't mean you get a flat and you go and live on your own somewhere. You can still remain with your carers, but it's, you know, those sort of things like budgeting, managing money, you know, commuting, friendships, engaging with your community and being connected, etc. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, let's go on to the next, and I've got Nick. Councillor Beggy, please.
Thank you. Lydia, I don't want to repeat what Andrew said, but a very impressive and professional presentation. I think what I can add to that is I've been around the block longer than a lot of you, even been through this very chair. And I've not quite felt so reassured about the future as I have done after that presentation. So thank you so much for that. Let's hope we see the outcomes at the next Ofsted. But I think the sort of detail and information you gave us tonight was honest and very, very enlightening. And I'm very clear on what the way forward is. So thank you for that. I just have one very specific question about the report, and I do try not to be a pedant. So, but I might do on this case. I'm just looking at one of the case examples you gave about the 21-year-old care leaver, and it's all about finding them accommodation, etc., due to their antisocial behaviour. My one concern out of this whole report was that seemed to be sort of addressing the symptom and not the problem. It would be just interested to understand some of not the detail in the background, because you can't go into that, but how you sort of deal with that dichotomy there, because obviously the antisocial behaviour is the disease, so to speak, as opposed to the landlord.
Yeah, and that's a really, really good point, actually, because there's a lot I could have gone into in terms of our ways of practice and moving from, you know, what we've acknowledged has been very paternalistic, particularly in that cohort of children and young people. But that particular case, actually, that was it's a really good example of impact of COVID. What that young man did, he lost his job in quick succession. He was out of money. That was the first ever, he'd been very stable in his housing. That was the first ever incident of that sort of behavior. And it was that kind of emotional projection of life feels a bit rubbish right now, basically. What happened in that situation is the landlord did not follow due process. Of course, he had to respond and react. What he did was he kicked and damaged the window of the hairdresser downstairs from the flat, and he was very apologetic. We understood the reasons behind that. He's since gone on to find and secure work, and he's got very stable relationships around him. But I think for me, what I was trying to highlight with that case example is the importance of relationship building with a wider directorate. So having those really good joint relationships with housing colleagues, that's me keeping in touch. What's going on this month? Anything I need to know? Because when an issue and a problem arises, actually those relationships come into fore very quickly, and they were able to prioritize that young man for us. But that was the impact of COVID on him and his mental health and his life and everything else that happened around him. But we've since picked him up since then.
Thank you, Lydia. Actually, you covered a very good point actually about cross-departmental working. I think what can't be forgotten actually, for example, housing. I've had a lot of dealings with them, and they've been incredibly helpful and receptive to my residents' complaints. So it's not just your team, it's how you work with the other teams and the excellent input from them. So that mustn't be forgotten either. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. Richard, Councillor Coleman, Richard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, I think I probably echo the sentiments of everybody else, Lydia. Very good report, and again, very informative. I do have a question from the actual report itself regarding workforce stability, which is at line 7. So again, most of the other ones are completed and are green on the RAG system. But this is talking about exit interviews being completed with staff. Obviously, I'm quite a metrics driven person. So I guess I'd be interested to know, I think you're right in what you said in terms of not only getting the right team, but retaining the right team. Are you still having any sort of turnover problems, and what sort of trends are you identifying from the exit interviews?
Yes, we have. So Councillor Wilby mentioned our talent pool from the cohort of frontline students that we had that have now actually completed successfully, and they're newly qualified social workers. So we started with 5 and 1 had to relocate because her husband's in the army and had to go to Greece. But there's 1 that just left and actually did not want to transition in Rutland, and she's very capable trainee, actually with a lot of potential. And it was somebody that on reflection was not on my radar, but somebody who would leave abruptly or not stay. She wasn't struggling. Sometimes you can see there's indicators coming. So that came completely out of the blue, and I did manage to have a conversation with her in terms of, is there anything we can learn? Is there something that we didn't do? It was a support. What I was very particularly interested about the support and what our students felt around the support they got in terms of the nature of the work. And what she did say, she actually said she loved working for Rutland. She loved the experiences that she had. She liked the small teams, but it was just that whole thing of being in a small organization where sometimes the nature of the work can push and pull you. And she was really looking for that focused type of work within a team that does one particular element of something. So on that team that she was particularly in, you could be in court one day doing court proceedings. You could be running out on a critical police investigation that's just come in, that's fresh off the, and you could be doing all sorts of things. So I think that has been difficult to navigate. It has been difficult to navigate for a lot of our staff, actually. But that was just an issue for me, reflection on resilience. How do we build that resilience? How do I not assume as a manager that people are coping? Because as I said, from face value, she was a really strong candidate. Her work was of an excellent quality, but actually she voiced that she did struggle with that. And I did ask her, what is it that made you feel you couldn't share that? Because I would have loved to help you find some contingency plans or solutions or talk it through. And she said, of course, I was approachable and the managers were approachable, but there wasn't a really clear answer around that. So my gut feeling is, obviously, as a student, you don't want to voice any concerns because that might come across as if you're not competent enough and you're worried about passing your degree. But yes, so we are doing that, and we are trying to understand constantly how do we improve. Luckily, we haven't had a turnover in the recent months. I'd say in the last 7 months, we've been quite stable. We recruited our permanent service manager. Our team managers have been in post for a while. And then our workforce have been made up of the students and the other workforce that's been there. So we've been fortunate not to have that turnover. But we are constantly learning, and our focus really for me is to improve a culture. What we hear is, I need to feel developed, I need to feel like I'm growing, I need to feel like I'm learning, especially if we have a cohort of newly qualified social workers. That's very important for them. So we're really focusing on that type of environment.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut in here. I'm very sorry, everybody. We are coming to 9:30, and we have to vote on an extension till 10. So if I could have that show of hands, please. I can see Councillor Beggy, everybody, Andrew, and that looks unanimous to me. Did it look to you, Jane?
Just Councillor Brown, Paul Brown. We need to extend the meeting. Are you in agreement with that? Thank you.
Okay, good. Sorry to interrupt there, Lydia. That was just a matter of protocol. Have you both finished the conversation, or?
Yes,
thank you both very much.
Thank you to Lydia for a very detailed response.
Good. And Councillor David Wilby, you have your hand up, sir.
Yeah, just to say, Lydia, that I think, to be fair, the situation that you found yourself in would have been eased had we not been sitting in COVID, and had you been able to use a crew room with general discussions and get closer to your workforce. So that's one of the downsides of our virtual reality, I think. But no, you explained it really well.
Okay. Thank you, David. I've just got one question, an observation and a question. Yes, I couldn't agree more than everybody else's viewpoints about the presentation. And actually, the progress that has been made, and Dawn and your team have just done exceptionally, in my opinion. And as we're striving for excellence, I should be on your tail to make sure that we do. But it has been absolutely wonderful. So great. My question really is around the Children's Service Improvement Plan. The spreadsheet now looks all green apart from one amber. Will you be updating the content of that in the near future?
Yes. We're literally in the process of updating our self-assessment. So at the end of October, we have what's called an annual engagement meeting with Ofsted, and in preparation for that, we are updating our self-assessment to share with them. We would have been updating it anyway, to be honest, in October, so the timing is not bad.
Okay.
And once we've updated our self-assessment, we are then going to have a new development plan that will flow out of that self-assessment. So by end of November, the intention is to have a new development plan as well. And then we can share both of those documents with Scrutiny as and when they're completed. So you'll get the self-assessment first, and then you'll get a month or so later, you'll get the development plan.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, before I move on, are there any other questions from anybody? I see no hands, so we move on. Thank you all very much. We'll move on to the item 11, Children's Services Performance End of Q1. So I think that's over to your good self again, Dawn. And I note that John Weller's not here tonight.
No, this is a report that doesn't usually go on as an agenda item. It's usually one that I circulate as and when the quarterly report becomes available. So I'm happy to take any questions that, rather than go through it page by page, because I know everybody always does read, particularly the performance reports. And I'm probably looking at Councillor Beggy in particular. So I'm very happy to take any questions that anybody may have.
No. Councillor Beggy has his hand up. What a surprise.
My trend lines are on there, Dawn. That's all I wanted. Thank you.
Yes, exactly.
Despite the lack of questions, I still think this is an exceptionally useful report. So thank you very much for circulating it.
And could I just to be clear, when the Q2 report comes out, which hopefully will be later in October, I will just get it circulated to the Scrutiny Committee rather than waiting for the next actual meeting. Are you happy with that? I mean, you can obviously pick up any questions with me, but rather than you waiting for the next committee meeting itself, if you're happy, I will just make sure these get circulated to you as and when they become available.
I'm always in favour of getting information in as early and so we have time to actually think about it and scrutinise. Hopefully there's no objections. I'm galloping on. Okay, great, thank you. So it brings us to the item 12, which is a review of the forward plan and annual work plan. Does anybody have any additions other than those discussed tonight that they want to add to the forward plan, or any subtractions?
Chair, I'm sorry, it's me again. Could we let Lydia leave the meeting?
Yes, I'm sorry,
point?
yes.
I'm just conscious that she probably doesn't need to sit into the end of the meeting, so.
Lydia, thank you, of course.
Thank you,
so
everyone.
sorry.
That's fine. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
Good evening. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay, sorry about that. I should have thought of that. The review of forward plan and annual work plan. Does anybody have any other comments other than the comments that came up during the meeting? Seeing lots of shaking heads. So we'll consider that as done. We will certainly review the additional items, and then I'll send out an email to the effect of where we think it can fit in, etc. Is item 13 then any other urgent business? Nothing, none have been notified. So the date of the next meeting is on Thursday, the 16th of December, and a decision will be made near the date if the meeting will be held via Zoom or in person. I hope we can continue to use Zoom. I find with these small meetings, it's actually pretty good. I know you had a big problem tonight, Paul, but hopefully we'll get better. We shall see what we're told to do. Thank you, everybody, for a very productive meeting, and good. The meeting is now closed officially at 21:35. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.